If you think having a voice in your head makes you crazy, this is the video for you. This video is going to talk about negative self-talk, why it's so important and why it affects all of us. And it's especially important for leaders to really get a hold of this and try to understand how it impacts their leadership and their work. So negative self-talk is this voice in our head which keeps saying negative things to us. Now, we all have a voice in our head. We all have positive thoughts sometimes and negative thoughts at other times. But sometimes there's this one voice which is constantly critical. It's constantly telling us negative things about us. And it's persistent in this negativity. It makes us feel bad. It's overly critical. And sometimes it can even be really abusive. So negative self-talk refers to this inner dialogue that diminishes our abilities. It devalues us. And it fuels these feelings of doubt or fear of shame. So rather than empowering us, it holds us back. It makes us feel less than what we can be. There are many different types of negative self-talk. I'll just give a few examples to highlight what I'm talking about here. For example, imagine you are stepping up to do something, you're presenting in a meeting, you're trying to negotiate a deal, you're giving a speech in front of hundreds of people, and let's say it's not a stellar performance. You feel like you could have done better. But rather than thinking about it as an opportunity to grow, or rather than thinking about it as something that you could learn from, you dwell and you ruminate on this experience, and you really focus on all the terrible things that happened, all the things that went wrong. And you can even take it out of proportion and start imagining scenarios as a result of this bad performance, or let's say it's not even a bad performance. Let's just say it's not a perfect performance, which it never really is. And all those scenarios are potential disasters. You're going to get fired, or you're going to lose your job, or you're going to lose the deal, or a terrible thing is going to happen. So this is just one example of negative self-talk. But in that example, there are things that are happening. There are patterns that occur in negative self-talk that it's really important to watch out for. Now, I'm not going to go through all the different patterns of negative self-talk. Maybe I'll cover those in a different video. Just as an example of what a couple of patterns look like, one of them is called mind reading. So mind reading is when someone acts a certain way towards us or says something to us, and we start assuming that we know what they're thinking about. So for example, you walk into a room, you say good morning to everybody in the room, one person doesn't respond, and immediately you start having thoughts of what this person might think of you. Maybe they're angry, maybe they don't respect you. And as a result of these thoughts that you have about this other person, you act a certain way towards them. So that's an example of mind reading. So rather than going to them and clarifying, or maybe repeating yourself in case they didn't hear and confirming that they didn't respond on purpose, you start assuming things about the other person. That's a form of negative self-talk, because this voice in your head is telling you all those negative things about what's happening. Another pattern of negative self-talk is labeling. So rather than saying that, I gave a bad speech, or rather than saying the speech was okay, but there might have been some room for improvement, you label yourself. You say, I'm terrible at giving speeches, or I'm a loser, or I'll never be good at this. So that's a form of labeling. So you've labeled yourself now. And that's really a form, if you've heard of the concept of growth versus fixed mindset, that's a form of having a fixed mindset, that because I've given one bad performance, or perhaps I saw opportunities to improve in that one performance, I've now labeled myself as someone who always gives bad speeches. So those are two types of negative self-talk. There's many other types of negative self-talk, which, as I mentioned, I might go through in a different video. But for the purpose of this video really is just to build awareness of what negative self-talk is and how it holds you back. Now, what does it look like in general? All the different patterns of negative self-talk, what do they look like? First, they're based on a kernel of truth. So maybe while you were giving that speech, maybe there was one part of it which wasn't amazing. You could have done better in that one part of the speech. So it's based on a kernel of truth. And the reality is, all of us in our day-to-day life experience moments where we feel we could have done better. So the negative self-talk always has fuel for the fire that it wants to create, because we always have moments where we feel maybe we could have done something better. But then what negative self-talk does is it takes this kernel of truth and distorts it, right? And the way it distorts it, first of all, is through all the different patterns that I talked about earlier. Maybe it's generalizing, maybe it's catastrophizing, maybe it's labeling, but then it adds an emotional component. So not only do you think that, oh, well, this is maybe wasn't an excellent speech or wasn't a great negotiation, but now I'm feeling shame. Now I'm feeling bad. Now I'm feeling like I'm being judged by other people. So there's this really strong negative emotional component. And the thing about negative self-talk, it's repetitive. Each person who engages in negative self-talk has their own favorite pattern of negative self-talk, and it's repetitive. So if you're the kind of person who is always generalizing, having one bad experience and generalizing it into many bad experiences, then that becomes your favorite pattern of negative self-talk. If you're the kind of person who likes to catastrophize, always imagining that terrible things are going to happen as a result of a small mistake, then that becomes your favorite pattern of negative self-talk. So it's a kernel of truth that gets distorted out of proportion. There's an emotional component that gets added to it, and then it repeats. At every opportunity that the negative self-talk can exert itself, we find it repeating. So where does this come from? Why do some of us, many of us, engage in negative self-talk? Well, it's based on our own limiting beliefs. What are the beliefs we have about the world, about ourselves, and really negative views that we have about ourselves? What are those beliefs? Maybe we believe, for example, somebody who might believe that there's a certain skill set that they're born with, and that's all they're going to ever have. So as soon as they meet a limitation of that skill set, then immediately they label, I'm never going to be able to improve in this. I'm always going to be bad at giving presentations. And so that's based on a belief that we have. And the other thing about negative self-talk is a lot of it really forms in our childhood. As children, we are born into this world and we're surrounded by caretakers, by our parents, by other significant figures in our life, and we develop strategies to deal with this world that we're in. So at one point, this negative self-talk, which developed in our youth, was actually helpful for us to be able to be successful in the world that we inhabited. So it might have been a sort of defense mechanism. So imagine, for example, that you had overly critical parents. And so by being self-critical, it alleviated the criticism from your parents because it made them feel that you were on top of things. So it became a kind of a helpful pattern to have, to always be critical of yourself. But then you grow up and you become an adult and you enter the real world, and it's no longer serving you in the right way. So one thing to think about is, are those patterns that you developed in childhood still serving you well? Or is it time to let go and try something else? So similarly, just as it forms in childhood, it can be an example of internalizing the voice of a parent or a dominant figure in your life. So if somebody, again, has been overly critical to you, then that voice gets internalized in your head. Then you carry that criticism with you everywhere you go. Leaders are really susceptible to negative self-talk because leaders tend to push themselves harder than everybody else. You had to work harder than everybody else to get to where you are now. You had to work on yourself, develop skills that other people maybe didn't have. You had to compete with others to get to the top. A lot of that might have been driven by negative self-talk, by this constant reminder that you're not doing as well as you think you should be doing at this point in your life, or so-and-so is ahead of you and you need to compete with them. And so all those different kinds of negative self-talk become a sort of motivation. It's not a healthy motivation maybe for some point of your life, but nonetheless, it got you to where you are now. So what's the problem? So a lot of people, and this is very common with a lot of clients that I have, they come to me and they say, well, actually, this negative self-talk got me here. It got me to this point in my life where I'm doing quite well. I'm in a leadership position. I'm making decent income. And I'm doing better than other people who are my peers, or perhaps better than I expected to be doing. So why should I work on it? Why should I stop this negative self-talk? Well, there are many reasons for this, and I'll talk about a few of them today. Well, first of all, negative self-talk comes from a place of insecurity. It doesn't come from a healthy place. It comes from a place where you don't feel good about yourself. And so your experience of life, of day-to-day achievement, is not one of satisfaction. It's not one where you feel happy about where you've reached. It's always looking at the next obstacle, the next milestone that you want to work towards. So the harder you work, the more you achieve in life, it doesn't feel like you've had achievement. Maybe you get a big promotion, maybe you land a great position, maybe you're now the CEO of a company, and you're happy with that for a while, for a month or 2 months, and then it becomes a source of frustration again. So it's not something that's meaningful for you or fulfilling for you. The other thing about negative self-talk is it gives you a distorted view of the world. So when we engage in negative self-talk, we don't really see the world as it is. So back to the example of the person giving the speech, rather than really having a critical eye on all the different areas where they can improve, and then be able to focus on those areas and really build skills in order to improve in those areas, they generalize, they label, they catastrophize, and then that becomes a limitation in their ability to improve. So this distortion holds you back in your ability to really engage. I had a talk recently with a very senior leader that I work with very closely, and he said that he never engaged in training in public speaking because part of the training required that he look at videos that he had recorded of himself, and he didn't want to look at those videos because he was embarrassed seeing himself on camera. So that was really holding him back. So that's an example of where negative self-talk can hold you back. And negative self-talk tends to come with feelings of shame, as I mentioned earlier, with feelings of low self-esteem. That's not really a great place to work from. You don't want to be working from that position. Finally, negative self-talk stops you from doing new and exciting things. It's like this overprotective parent who's always telling you to play it safe. So it keeps you in the safe bubble of things that you've tried in the past that you know that you can do well, rather than pushing you outside your comfort zone to challenge yourself and to grow into new areas. The other big question that I always get asked is, if I overcome negative self-talk, will I lose this motivation to achieve? To answer those questions, first of all, the alternative to negative self-talk is obviously the inner voice that supports you, that gives you a less distorted view of the world. I'm not going to say that you're going to reach a point where it's going to be completely a factual or objective view of the world. I don't think anyone has a 100% objective view of the world, but at least more objective, more helpful and supportive, so allowing you to really see the areas where you can improve, where you can do better, and to learn from your experience rather than being very hard on yourself. So the idea is to replace negative self-talk with more accurate self-talk. And really the most important part is to reduce this emotional component that keeps pulling us down. And regarding the fear of what happens when you lose your negative self-talk or overcome your negative self-talk, will you lose motivation to perform? On the contrary, research shows that having a supportive and empowering inner voice is much more conducive to achievement and to growth than having a voice that engages in negative self-talk. And not only that, but when you do achieve something, it's genuinely fulfilling. You feel good about yourself rather than feeling like it's a fleeting moment of satisfaction and then you move on to the next thing. So that's just an overview of negative self-talk. I wanted to give you a flavor of what negative self-talk is and how it might feel like to be the kind of person who engages in negative self-talk. If you're this kind of person, comment below, tell me about it. Feel free to reach out on my website if you would like to work on it, and subscribe and follow, because I will record a few more videos about the different types of negative self-talk and about the tool that you can apply to start training your mind to overcome negative self-talk and to recognize it for what it is so that you stop engaging in it. Thank you very much. I'll see you in the next video.